When I was 14, I wanted to make more money. I was getting $5 a week for mowing the lawns at my house, and that just wasn't enough for me as the filthy capitalist teenager that I was. And so I went onto Google and I searched how to make money online as a teenager. That led me to an article that said, hey, you can start a blog and you can make money that way. 30 minutes later, I was writing my first blog post. There was no overthinking, no second guessing myself, just pure, simple, straightforward action. I can start a blog, I can potentially make money. All right, let me start a blog. Let me start writing some blog posts. It's this action-oriented mentality that took me from starting that blog to building a successful online business a few years later. It's the same mentality that nudged me to ask my now wife out on a date when I saw her at the grocery store. It's the same mentality that's expanded my life in ways that I could never have predicted. Whether it's doing things like running New Zealand's toughest marathon, starting this YouTube channel, meeting interesting people, the list goes on. What I've come to realize is that most of the enjoyment, growth, and success in my life can be attributed not to complex planning, strategizing, or thinking through the decision, but rather action. The more I cultivate this bias towards action, towards doing, the better my life becomes. Unfortunately though, this is not how I typically operate. I'm far more likely to overthink, overplan, overanalyze, and overstrategize. Let's call this mental maximalism. The mental maximalist spends months making decisions that he could make in one day. He overthinks, he overanalyzes, he second guesses himself, he reads about things like mental models without ever actually using them. He's very cerebral and very in his own head. And by always being in his own head, the mental maximalist is always in his own way. If you identify with this archetype, then you know that mental maximalism is a broken operating system. The only thing it maximizes is more confusion, worry, stress, and a low-level feeling of anxiety and dissatisfaction. The solution to mental maximalism is not found in cognition. You cannot think your way out of overthinking. The solution is to courageously turn 180 degrees and embrace mental minimalism, at least for some time until you've dealt with the bad habits of mental maximalism. And I use the word courageously here because it's what you need. Every fiber of your being will reject you wanting to embrace mental minimalism if you are the person who constantly overthinks and delays action. As Peter Thiel says in his book 0 to 1, brilliant thinking is rare, but courage is an even shorter supply. Mental minimalism is an action-centric philosophy. It prioritizes doing over thinking, experimentation over hypothesizing, gut instinct over pros and cons lists. Now, I've come up with 5 principles that form the foundation of this mental minimalism philosophy. Let's start with the first one, which is that you cannot think your way out of overthinking. As George Mack wrote on Twitter, trying to think your way out of overthinking is like trying to snort your way out of a cocaine addiction. We try to think our way out of overthinking because it's the path of least resistance. It's something we do to delay action, because for many of us, even the idea of taking action introduces this resistance, it introduces discomfort. It's a threat to stasis. It's a threat to the comfort zone. But you will not escape the inertia of overthinking without taking action. You need to get into motion. You need to get out of your head and into the physical world. And the best way to do this that I know of is to just do the obvious work in front of you. It might be menial work like household chores, vacuuming the house, washing the dishes, organizing your office. Maybe it's answering some emails, just the simple work that gets you out of your head and into motion. And you might ask, but Sam, what about busy work? Don't I need to work on important high priority tasks? What about the Eisenhower matrix? The answer to that is yes, but that assumes that you are already taking action, that you're already busy, that you're already out of your own head and in the physical world. If you are, then yes, you need to avoid busy work. But for the mental maximalist who's stuck in this state of debilitating inertia, there's no such thing as busy work. Anything that creates momentum or motion is good. Anything that gets you out of your head and into the physical world is good. So that's the first principle. You cannot think your way out of overthinking. You need to do something. Do something basic, do the menial work, do the obvious work that's in front of you. The second principle is that clarity exists on the other side of action. Much of our overthinking is an attempt to gain clarity. We falsely believe that if we just think through it enough, that we'll get to this point where we have perfect clarity. And we then think that if we have perfect clarity, then it will be easy for us to take action. This is not true. First of all, while clarity can come through pure thinking, it's much more likely to be a product of action, of doing. You can only get so much data by sitting around pondering. And so even when people say, well, of course you can think your way to clarity, quite often that is thinking that's done after taking some sort of action where you're introspecting and you're reflecting on the things that you've done. If you haven't done any of the things, then you have nothing to reflect on, right? You're just kind of like thinking in the abstract, thinking through possibilities, and it's quite hard to gain clarity that way. Let me give you an example of this. Consider two people wanting to start a business. One is a mental maximalist, one is a mental minimalist. And they're trying to gain clarity on which business model to choose. The mental maximalist spends months researching, reading books, thinking, analyzing different business models. He agonizes over different options. He hopes that it will all click eventually, and then he'll finally take action and build the business. The mental minimalist, also known as the action taker, reads a blog post on how to start a power washing business or something similar. And he thinks, well, that can't be too hard. Let me give it a go. So he buys some equipment, he knocks on some doors, maybe he makes a sale on his first day and he validates his business model. Maybe he doesn't, but he gets a bunch of feedback on how he can improve his service offering. Either way, he's got data and he's got more clarity as a result of taking action. Meanwhile, the mental maximalist is still stuck in planning mode and hasn't done much at all. There's a sub-principle here, which is to trust in iteration. The mental minimalist takes action as a way to iterate towards clarity. Trusting in iteration means not being married to a precise end goal or precise end state, but instead embracing redirection. The mental maximalist, on the other hand, tries to predict and think through all potential redirections before they even begin, and that is a futile endeavor. The third principle is that pressure is the antidote to stasis. Mental maximalist behavior often arises from low pressure situations. When you have the luxury of overthinking, you are far more likely to do it because there's no forcing function. I experienced this firsthand because I was a disciple of the 4-hour workweek philosophy. And at the age of about 24, I'd built a business that was making decent money and I didn't have to work that much. And so I had all this freedom. But this freedom produced a vacuum, which was then filled not by action on other worthwhile projects, but by chronic overthinking and paralysis by analysis. Why? Because I had the luxury of mucking around and avoiding taking action. I didn't need to do anything. There was no pressure. And so it was just filled with like this useless sort of mental masturbation. By the way, I hated this. I'd have these weird fantasies about waking up one day to find that my business had completely failed or that I'd been sued for all my money, simply so I would be kicked out of the stasis that I was in and be forced to take action. So if you lack pressure, like I did, then that's part of the problem. You need skin in the game. You need deadlines, discomfort, intensity, speed. Pressure directs your thinking. Instead of wandering aimlessly around the cognitive playground, you're forced to think with intention. The open-ended question of what should I do becomes, I need to do something. Here's one thing that makes sense. What's the first step I need to take today? That's an example of directed thinking as opposed to the open-ended, undirected thinking. By the way, this is the driving philosophy behind Work Sprint. Speed, deadlines, accountability, skin in the game. You can join the waiting list in the link in the description. The fourth principle is that embracing uncertainty expands life. Playing a video game where you know exactly what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, and how it's going to happen is not that fun of a game to play. There's a degree of uncertainty and surprise that makes games interesting. And the same applies to life. The best moments in life don't come from obsessive certainty seeking, but rather serendipity. Mental minimalism is about embracing this uncertainty and this serendipity. It's adopting the screw it, let's give it a go philosophy and seeing where it leads. It's choosing adventure over precise blueprints, childlike curiosity over calculation. The final principle is to pull yourself into the present. The further you mentally project out into the future, the more opaque your vision becomes and the easier it is to get stuck in overthinking loops. To combat this, you must pull yourself back into the present. Don't worry about how the marathon that's 4 months away is going to turn out. Go run 5 miles today as part of your training plan. Not sure where your business is going to be in 2 years? Neither does anyone else. Do what you need to do today to move it forward. If your vision for the year is blurry, then create one for the quarter. If your vision for the quarter is blurry, create one for the week. If your vision for the week is blurry, then focus on the day. Bring yourself back to the present and focus on what needs to be done. Now, these are operating principles. They are not for pondering and philosophizing over. They are for living by. It's time to embrace mental minimalism, to trade mental maximalism for action maximalism. So, start, get in motion, do the work that's in front of you, commit to something, iterate, adapt. Don't think about taking action, take it.